here we go, Pat. Over the last year, we spent a lot of time talking about AWS, homegrown, what their plan is. And we've been saying, what's Azure going to do? What's Azure going to do? And now Azure's starting to talk about what their plans are, and with an announcement this week.
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of a backdrop here. So for about 20 years, people have been saying that compute is commoditized, but the industry keeps proving everybody wrong, right? And that's because in the last 20 years, the industry has taken different approaches, right? It used to be that only merchant silicon vendors were available for data centers, and that was Intel, right? That was the standard. And AMD got up to I think 20% at its maximum market share back when I was at the company, and then it went down to like 1%, and now it's up around 15%. But along the way, over the last 10 years, the ability to create your own SoC with a combination of ARM IP, ARM ecosystem IP, and the tools from companies like Synopsys and Cadence, combined with the ability to take those designs into a TSMC, have really transformed the industry. You look at Apple with its M1, you look at AWS with Graviton 2, Inferentia, Trainium, and what I referred to as before with Nitro. And you can see that with all these things happening and the desire to decommoditize compute, we are here with Azure. And Azure announced that it was going ARM with some of its instances with a company called Ampere. By the way, the other requirement out there in the cloud was that they really wanted one processor for one instance, okay, as opposed to using hyper-threading, because what the hyperscalers tell me is that the quality of service is more consistent. And there was stuff on merchant chips that people just didn't want, right, that came with Intel and AMD. So it's been 5 years since Azure made its big announcement with Qualcomm and Cavium. But challenge was Qualcomm got out of the business when it was under attack by regulators. Broadcom and Apple wasn't paying their bills. And Cavium was acquired by Marvell. And Marvell did an analysis of the market and just said, listen, we can't compete in this general purpose market, but what we can compete with is more of a directed application specific type processor. And they decided to leverage off the shelf ARM cores and take it into TSMC 5 nanometer. So it took a while, but Azure is here. Now, if I look at the economics, right, between Azure and AWS, right? AWS is designing its own microprocessors. Azure is buying its microprocessors. So AWS will have higher R&D, but Azure will likely have a higher BOM cost, because essentially all AWS is paying for is the silicon at TSMC. So hard for me now to say which is better, building or buying financially. But overall, I think what this puts the exclamation point on is the two largest IaaS providers. And I think some people would call Oracle the third, have gone ARM. And that doesn't mean going ARM means you're not going Intel or AMD. All these companies are going Intel, AMD, and ARM, but it does signify, I would say, a strategic open arms hug on ARM, because you can't just say support ARM. You need your operating systems, you need your development tools, you need push button capability to move an instance from an Intel instance to an Ampere instance, very similar to what AWS is doing with their Graviton Challenge, which, by the way, was announced at 6.5 Summit 2021. Thank you, Dave Brown and AWS. But this is a marathon and not a sprint. So, I'm not going to get into the performance claims. By the way, Microsoft and Ampere claimed up to 50% better price performance than comparable x86 Azure VMs for scale-out workloads. Wasn't asterisked, wasn't footnoted. I was a little disappointed, and I have to call them out on that.
Yeah, I like that you do that. That's a Moorhead special. And by the way, I appreciate that. I think there's a couple of sub themes here. I think your point is that these companies are going to be arbiters of choice, and they're going to allow customers to pick which compute they want to run their workloads on. They're going to have all of them. They're going to do it for compute. They're going to do it for GPUs. And they're going to build integrations that allow companies, because the thing is nobody's going to have 100% of the market in anything. Not in networking, not in storage. So they're going to always be building integration. And so Microsoft is no different, but there's another subplot here, Pat, is that these companies are increasingly raising their hand and saying, we can give better performance for lower cost if you use our compute. And it started with obviously AWS, but Alibaba's doing this overseas too. You've got Microsoft now coming into market. Oracle is heading down this path as well. And by the way, it's smart. It raises another challenge for Intel, something Intel and AMD, but something both companies are going to have to figure out how to address, because ARM is growing in popularity. Companies are figuring out how to, quote unquote, build for and on ARM. And companies that are building around more modernized and native cloud apps, your Snowflakes, your S4s, your next generation Oracle, this is easier to do. It's easier to run on these newer types of architectures. And so what's probably protected some of the legacy compute has been all the legacy technical debt that a lot of these companies have. They have old database technology, old ERP technology, and it's not easy to refactor it for these new type of compute offerings. But as that changes, and it will change, that's going to make ARM more and more competitive, which, Pat, takes me back, by the way, to my comment about the 22% of the market. Now, again, one thing I will keep saying, and I think it bears repeating, Pat, is that the overall demand for compute is also growing. So while sometimes you hear about market share in disruption, if you can keep a chunk of market share and the market is significantly larger, you can actually still grow revenue while conceding market share. So everybody that's kind of looking at, that this is a sort of binary thing or all or nothing, the amount of compute that's going to be required to run an enterprise, to run anything, is going to keep growing. And so all these companies have plenty of opportunity, but it is going to be it's an arms race, and semiconductors are at the core. And I didn't even think about that. God, I'm on fire today. ARM is going to have a bigger and bigger impact now that the NVIDIA deal is in the rear view. And Pat, by the way, I know NVIDIA only started with its big Grace and Grace Hopper and its big HPC CPUs on ARM. But do you really think they're not going to come down? Do you really think there's not going to be more and more ARM and general purpose stuff that's going to come out of NVIDIA over the next few years? I think that's probably in the works as well. So again, I love competition. I think it just gives us things to talk about. It gives something to focus on. And by the way, when there's great competition amongst a number of great companies, you know who wins? Consumers, the enterprises, the businesses. Right. They're going to win because of choice. So, good for Microsoft. They've got a way to go here, but I think they've picked, at least it seems that they've picked a path, and they're coming out, and now we can, get on with it.